Hello and welcome to Red Canary Mac Monitor, a new free tool for gathering macOS telemetry. Now, today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Red Canary and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach with Actual Tech Media, and I am excited to be your moderator today. And I am joined by my friend and fellow moderator here at Actual Tech Media, and that is Josh Randall. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Jess. How are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, mostly because I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm really excited to learn about this awesome solution from Red Canary. Josh, what are you most excited to learn about in this webinar?
Well, Jess, in true Josh fashion, I made the most bizarre connection while watching Across the Spider-Verse recently. So, as Spidey was traveling through the multiverse, he learned about the other tools that the other Spider people used. They talked about how to improve their detection and response time, their Spidey senses. And they
Yes.
had me excited for the Red Canary solution to the Mac OS detection and response strategies.
Okay. So what I'm taking away from this right now, Josh, is that you're telling me that watching this webinar is going to give us all the powers of Spider-Man. And is that the right takeaway?
You'll be like just as cool as Spider-Man minus a spider bite.
Well, hey, that's the dream right there. So on that note, I think we should get started. Josh, how about we talk about some of the housekeeping stuff?
Totally. Let's swing into it. So let's start off with the question section of your webinar. This is the best place to get involved, interact, and post all your insightful questions, comments, feedback, and ideas. We want to hear from you. So find that questions tab now and give it a test run with a hey, hi, hello, and wave to the community here with you today. As a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during the session. Knock on wood, of course. Don't forget that a browser refresh should get rid of the usual tech goblins. That's a Spider-Man reference. But if not, just shoot a message in the questions tab and the ATM crew will be there to help you. And the last thing I want to point out on your audience console is the handouts tab. Go check out some of the cool resources and follow-ups to our conversation today. Jess, what do we have for the good people in the handout section today?
So many great resources. Red Canary has a supercharged set of handouts for all of you, starting with the 2023 Threat Detection Report. This is an in-depth look at the most prevalent trends, threats, and attack techniques. Basically, all of the info, all of the awareness that you need to help your team focus on what matters most. Then there's an awesome blog introducing Red Canary Mac Monitor. So, of course, this is what we are here to talk about today. So this resource is going to be a great follow-up to everything that we are just about to hear. And then there's a link to download and install Mac Monitor. So when we wrap up and you're feeling super excited, as I know you all will, you are going to want that link open. So open it right now, save that tab for after we wrap. And last but not least, we have a blog post on how to validate your defenses with atomic test harnessing for Linux and Mac OS. So you can read a little bit more about how you can use this suite to emulate multiple variations of given attack techniques on Linux and Mac OS systems. So all of these are super cool reads and will definitely get your spidey senses tingling. So Josh, speaking of superpowers, you have a super prize to give away today, right?
I see what you tried to do there, but yes, we have a super prize to give away. Today, we have a $250 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're not sure what those are, you can find the full T's and C's linked in the handouts tab Jess was just telling you about.
Handy dandy handouts tab. All right, well, that does it for our housekeeping session. We were keeping that nice and short and sweet for y'all, and we are ready to dive into our presentation. Josh, what do you think? Should we get our expert speakers out here with us?
Absolutely. I am so excited to introduce to you all today Matt Graber, Director of Threat Research at Red Canary, Brandon Dalton, Senior Threat Researcher at Red Canary, and Corey Smith, Threat Hunter, coolest job title ever, by the way,
Yes.
at Red Canary. This is such a cool collection of experts and a fascinating topic. I just can't wait to jump in. So let's get our experts out here with us and get this thing started. Matt, I think you're going to kick us off. So, Matt, take it away.
Well, I am super excited to be able to introduce and help familiarize everyone with Mac Monitor, but I'm mainly going to be kicking it off to Brandon, the creator of this incredible tool, and to Corey to offer some awesome use cases for this. But just a quick intro. One of the reasons I'm so excited for this day is like it's been a long time coming internally at Red Canary. Like I remember working with Brandon from like the very early days of when this was just an idea in his mind, and when he just started digging into Apple endpoint security events and really starting to uncover like just how much power could be tapped into if only there was more mature tooling to be able to do so. And at the same time, like me being more of a Windows endpoint person, I had a lot to learn. And so this has been an awesome learning experience for me. And what's great is that I could just fire up this tool, and even with the relative level of ignorance that I have in macOS, I could just hit start on this thing and start seeing really rich telemetry and have this thing like answer my questions, whether I'm doing malware analysis, just basic like detection engineering style work, you name it. Brandon's going to dig into all of this. And so with that, let's do some quick intros.
Hey everyone. So yeah, thank you so much for the awesome intro, Matt. I'm incredibly humbled. For those of you that don't know, my name is Brandon Dalton. I'm a threat researcher here at Red Canary. I focus specifically on macOS security topics, and I'm also the author of our Mac Monitor. And passing it over to Corey and Matt.
Yeah, so I'm Corey here from, oh, sorry, Matt.
Please.
Go. So I'm Corey Smith here at Red Canary. I'm a threat hunter. So I work with our customers on security questions ranging from remediation and threat hunting to advisement, really the operational side of things.
And I'm Matt Graber. I'm the Director of Threat Research. Brandon is on my team, and one of my roles here at Red Canary is to ensure that Brandon has all the time and resources needed to do awesome work like this and to ask him dumb questions all the time about macOS.
Thank you so much, Matt. So yes, so here I would like to start with showing you guys our feature overview graphic. So for those of you that haven't seen, this is kind of just a quick summary of everything that Mac Monitor kind of encompasses and some of the core ideas that we wanted to highlight in this tool. And you can see it just, highlighting some important events surrounding BTM, background task management items, as well as deleting extended attributes, which is cool. So now going a little bit more into the agenda. So at a high level, we're just going to be talking about some problems. We'll be talking about some screenshots about, the different feature set the tool has to offer. But also we'll be seeing a lot of demos, which we're really excited about. So in short, it took us way too long to answer simple questions about macOS visibility. There were a lot of tools that we had to utilize. There was a lot of jumping around we had to do. And in short, what does that really look like? Well, it looks like this. So this is the Red Canary detection pipeline at a bird's eye overview. I give kind of our prospective customers this presentation also, although in a different light. So what ends up happening is we'll install an EDR sensor, or we'll utilize some custom tooling to kind of pull out endpoint security events. And the reason we're trying to do this is because we want to see all the different telemetry that the vendors are able to collect themselves. In a lot of cases, what we noticed is, hey, we want this resolution a lot better, but also we want it faster. I shouldn't have to send it through the entire Red Canary detection pipeline to see what comes out the other side. It's also difficult to collect and enrich macOS telemetry well for analysis. Like Matt said, Procmon for this is ideal in many cases. We really wanted something similar on the macOS end of the spectrum. So what would it take? This was a huge ask. I just saw a really fun API that we're able to play around with, and some of the features weren't being used extensively in the community that I would have liked to be seeing. So what would it take? Well, it would take a taskable endpoint security client that supports dynamic event subscriptions and path muting capabilities, something that Apple's team has really thrown a lot of time into and that we're especially really appreciative of. It would have to be system extension based. The reason for this is we would like to enable early boot logging. as well as really get down to as close to the sensor level as possible. It would need to have an XPC service that's both secure and performant, an easy to use, friendly user interface that's focused on reducing noise. This is done in Swift UI. It would also have to support telemetry export because you're not going to be spending all of your time in this tool. You're going to want to share your findings with other people, other researchers, and this feature kind of enables you to do that. But more than that, it also would require research time and resources, and this is something that I'm incredibly thankful for Red Canary and Matt Graber specifically and Jimmy Hassel for giving me the resources to do this. And performance, right? So this thing needs to be performant. It needs to be able to store theoretically unlimited events. It needs to be able to process all these events in a performant way, and we enabled this with core data. So now I'm passing it off to Matt, where he can talk a little bit more about the Windows end with Procmon.
Yeah, so considering my background, Procmon, I use it all the time for myriad use cases, whether it's doing things like detection engineering, like just seeing what telemetry might be available that we might be able to tap into in our partner sensors. We're doing vulnerability research, analyzing the attack surface of software, doing basic dynamic malware analysis, or just like general system troubleshooting. I use Procmon as my go-to tool for initial investigation. Pretty much all the naturally, a lot of the feedback and suggestions that I had for Brandon as he was developing Mac Monitor derived from some of the workflows that I use in Procmon. So I wanted to speak to those, and then for those of you who do have a Windows background, maybe you'll see some of the parallels here and how Mac Monitor can serve many of those similar use cases, and then some for macOS. So one tool that we've developed here at Red Canary is called Atomic Test Harnesses. We use this to do like deep analysis of any given attack technique, where we're researching all as many variations as possible for a technique as possible, and then integrating those into a single tool where we can have granular control over many of the aspects of an adversary would, but in a way that we can have granular control over the telemetry that we would expect to see. But the question is, in the first place, like what telemetry is available, one, on the native system, and then two, from our partner vendor EDR sensors, and then three, like what at Red Canary can we standardize across all of those to derive value for high fidelity, ideally low volume detections. So again, I mentioned Procmon is one of the first tools that I'll use for answering those initial questions. And one of my favorite features is when I start a trace, do my thing that I want to trace, I'll stop the trace, and then Control-T is my favorite key combination to pull up this process timeline. And what I love about it, especially in addition to like the process tree layout, is that lifetime column. So when I start and stop the trace, I can almost guarantee that the artifacts related to the action that I performed will correspond to the lifetime that didn't exist from both before and after. So you can see like in the lifetime column, the more narrow entries do indeed correspond to the artifacts that I would expect for, in this case, testing the MSI attack technique. And so then what I can do from there is just include those processes that appear to be related to the technique that I'm testing. And then I can start drilling into those individual events. And very importantly, I can filter out a lot of the noise that I wouldn't deem as necessary or relevant to whatever my particular use case is. In this case, I might be interested to see like if there are any interesting module loads In the case of this test, I was interested to see that, yes, indeed, jscript.dll is being loaded, but also some security related DLLs are being loaded. WLDP, AMC.dll, the Defender client DLL, as well as any like system modifications, so registry rights, file rights, so on and so forth. I can get all this with Procmon. This shouldn't be shocking to many people who use this all the time, but this was the sort of thing that like I would love to see in a similar tool for macOS. Another thing, just a little tangential, one of my favorite features is looking at the stack trace of any event. This is very common in my workflow, and I would love to see this in any tool, but I know that this it's not a common use case for everyone's just very, very nice to have. And then, but so as I was providing this feedback to Brandon, I did also want to call out some of the limitations of Procmon. So for example, it offers a lot of telemetry, but at its core, it only supports file events, registry events, network events, and process events. There are a ton of other system events in Windows that it doesn't capture. For example, anything that falls under the purview of event tracing for Windows. There are a ton of these ETW providers that other like endpoint sensors take full advantage of. But you can't use this tool to see that necessarily. What I really like about Apple Endpoint Security is that they're being extremely deliberate about designing and presenting high fidelity security related events to any vendor who wants to consume them. And unfortunately, Microsoft isn't nearly as consistent in their logging as Apple is now. So with that, take it away, Brandon.
Thank you so much, Matt. And yeah, thank you for mentioning the common sheet of music, as our Director of Detection Enablement likes to put it. Yeah, we really appreciate Apple giving every vendor the common set of events, these really high fidelity events. So what problems does this solve? The existing tooling that we had access to, it was very narrow in its focus, and the user experience wasn't nearly as refined as something like Procmon. So talking about our core feature set, some key points to note here are the graphical interface, event subscriptions, path muting and filtering, as well as beyond ES enrichment. And this enables us to key off of certain high value ES events and kind of like task our sensor to go out and pull a specific piece of information that might be more relevant for analysis. And we'll show demos of all this. So what's all the fuss about? I'm going to pass it over to Corey now, and she's going to walk you through an initial demo.
Okay, then let me get my screen share pulled up. But while it's loading, just as a bit of background, I've already queued up Red Rock with an atomic test harness test. Specifically, we'll find out when we start digging into the data what exactly it is. But like Matt Graber mentioned, atomic test harness is great for verifying not just if your alert logic is working as expected, but are you even getting the data that you need to create those alerts? So before we start digging into Red Rock, there's a couple dashboards that you're presented with when you just open up the tool. I've already collected some data, so we have something to work with here. In the top left-hand side, you'll see the events table. And this is every single event that was captured during that time frame. You'll see things like process execution, file renames, memory mapping, file creations. To see a full list of everything that could possibly be in this list here, we can go under Red Rock in the Settings tab, and you can see the subscription section. Right now, I have an older version of Red Rock, so it's only going to show 14 options, but Brandon mentioned there's 32 event types in the current version of Red Rock. So when you go and download it today from GitHub, they'll have a lot more at your fingertips. But you can see interesting events like deleting extended attributes or OpenSSH logins, XProtect malware detected. So there's a lot of good information, very interesting information that you might not get from just a typical EDR sensor. So that's what to expect in this events table. Next to it, we have a nice distribution bar graph so you can see what type of event is most common in the environment or in this data set. We can see memory mapping. It's pretty big here, clocking in at over 400 events. And then down below here in this bottom section where it says processes, that will be all of those events rolled up into the source process. So we can see XPC proxy, Bluetooth D, etc. So to actually search and pivot around in this tool, I'm going to start with my, when I ran this test, I know that I ran it using Python. So I'm going to start from something that I know, searching just for the keyword Python in this search bar in the upper right-hand side. So that automatically filters everything just to that keyword. And we can see here down at the bottom, there's a Python process. To see the details of it, we just have to right-click, and we'll be given this event metadata option. There's other options available. You can filter out information. So maybe you're not interested in Python, or you aren't really concerned about process execution right now. You can filter out that information. You can also mute paths, so prevent that from being collected overall rather than just hiding it from view. But right now, we want to see the details. So let's go ahead and jump into event metadata. And this will show us a fact sheet. Over on the left-hand side will be a nice process tree. It's not super interesting at this point, but you can see it starts with a Z shell, which then spawns Python. And then in the middle of the screen are the process details. So you get timestamps, you get user information, you get key callouts like this is the group leader. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, the command line, process path, as well as command line. And this command line kind of gives a tip off of what test I was running. I was using the POSIX atomic test harness for macOS, specifically technique 1059, subtechnique 7. I haven't memorized those numbers, so I don't expect any of you to know that off the top of your head, but that is for the JavaScript for automation using the OSAKit API. So as a sneak peek, we're going to be expecting to see using the OSAKit API, the process is going to be reading from a plain text file, compiling a Swift binary, and then executing it. So we should be seeing some indications of that in the data soon. But before we start digging in further, just calling out some other highlights, we have code signing information. We can tell this is indeed legitimate Python binary. We have the certificate chain here. And then down below is context items like environment variables and audit tokens. If we want to see what this process did, because this is just now like process metadata, we can go to the event correlation up at the top in the middle of the screen where it says 138 events. And that will give us a unified view of all these subscribed events that we saw earlier. So things like process execution, so what child processes were created, memory mapping, file creation, that sort of thing. We can see the event type and the target, and then of course the process name is going to be Python, what we're currently looking at. There's nothing super interesting here, so I'm just gonna keep moving on. The next section I want to focus on is the initiating process tab. That will be parent information. You'll see the initiating user, the process path, as well as code signing details. You'll also get some context items like audit tokens down at the bottom. And then last but not least, there's JSON. And so this will be the raw telemetry that we got from Apple to populate that metadata tab. So this is here for reference. You can see we have the group ID information, we have parent audit token details, we have process name, user accounts. All of that here is available for you to view. There's also, before I pivot away from here, a way to export this telemetry. Up in the the very tip-top ribbon, you'll see export telemetry, either the full system trace, or if you just want this single event. You can have it pretty printed or in lines, so you can share it with other researchers, or maybe load it into another tool like a SIM to make it easy for searching. And then the last piece we have that we haven't covered yet is the process groups tab. So we have 8 processes related to Python, in this Python group. If we scroll down to the bottom, because it is in reverse chronological order, we'll see we have Python here executing. We have our command line. But up a bit further, We see Xcode Select, which is the macOS development tool suite, and then Swift C. If you'll recall, I mentioned that we're going to see a Swift binary be compiled and then executed. So this is where that binary is being compiled. And if we look at the command line, we have a hint of where that binary is going to land. It's going to be called OSAKit example. And when we scroll up towards the top of this thing here, we'll see OSAKit example being executed. Now this is highlighted in red because the signing information is unknown. So we want to call that out and draw your attention to it so you're able to tell that this needs more scrutiny. We'll right click on it and jump into the event metadata for that suspicious process. This will give us another fact sheet. Again, we'll have filled out process tree on the left so we can see Z shell, Python, and then this OSAKit example process. We'll get the same information, the timestamps, the user account, process path, and the command line. You'll notice command line doesn't have any parameters, so we don't really have any details of what this process was doing or what information it was provided. We also see that it's not signed at all. So from here, we'll go into event correlation to see if we have some hints of what occurred. Expand these column names so we can see it. So since this is in reverse chronological order, we'll see at the bottom, OSAKit example executes, and then it starts mapping memory. Some callouts here being AppleScript, JavaScript, and standard additions. And then the process exits. So there's no child processes, there's no file changes. All we get is that it started, it mapped memory, and then it executed. But what's interesting is what was mapped to memory. We see AppleScript, JavaScript, standard additions. That's indicative that there was OSA code involved. And this is what we expect for this atomic test. We want to see this memory mapping. Which this is kind of a very basic example, but of how to get to this. This example shows us how we can start with a very simple test. We really don't know where in the data we're going to see this memory mapping. And just with a handful of clicks within a few minutes, we can tell what's important from this table. We can find the potential suspicious or evil activity. Without a tool like Redrock, we would have to use this JSON blob, stitch it all together. JSON's great for machines to read, but not so much for humans. So having the data in a table and being able to pivot between different views with just a click of a button, it's really valuable for research, for investigations and threat hunting. So this is a really basic example. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brandon. He has a more in-depth demo that he'll be able to show you.
Thank you so much, Corey. Yeah, so I'm extremely excited to present this to everybody. So while this loads up here, there might be some lag involved, so I do apologize. But on the left-hand side, you'll see a Mythic C2 server hosted in AWS. I'll quickly go through what we're going to be talking about here. So we're going to be executing an example of a malicious installer. This malicious installer is going to do something very simple. It's going to establish a callback to the Mythic server, and it's also going to persist itself by a legacy plist launch agent. And so this example will give us kind of like an in-the-wild atomic example of something that you would expect to see, especially from the red teaming perspective. So if we go ahead and if we launch Mac Monitor here, and if we start our event trace, well, actually, first let's just go through at a very high level. We're collecting 17 different events here, ranging from files to processes, etc. The path mute set is default for Mac Monitor. We expanded on Apple's default mute set a little bit here to reduce a little bit more noise. But if we just go ahead and start recording the system trace here, what we're going to do is we are going to launch this Chrome package. And this Chrome package is a malicious installer. So if we go ahead and we start this process here, and you'll see some nice macOS 13 things like, giving you some BTM items added notifications here. But then you'll also see the nice Mythic callback server get established. Can move that to the trash. I'm going to stop our system trace since this isn't really relevant anymore. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take a look at just the processes. So I'm going to hit Command 2, and this will essentially just toggle our process view. And this is something similar that you would see at Red Canary as a detection engineer. You mostly see process-related information along with command lines. So you can see stuff like, oh, the Swift front end is being loaded here and doing things like compiling Swift code. You can also see, hey, launch control is loading our launch agent here. But now if we take a look at the OSAKit process, and particularly we can see like, hey, there's some interesting stuff in the command line here. But more than that, there's also these memory mapping events like Corey was just talking about. So anything that's JavaScript, AppleScript, standard components, stuff like that, that's very indicative of OSA code execution via API, something that's incredibly hard to detect by most EDR sensors. So now that we have that, we can also go through and look at, hey, let's take a look at this launch control process. Now, if you guys notice, I didn't select the package installer process. What I did is I just wanted to take a look at this launch control one. But then, I mean, it's part of the same process group, right? So you can quickly identify chain of activity here and say like, oh, the ZHS shell loaded, curl did something, Swift did something, and then we loaded a persistence mechanism here. And then, of course, you have your same event correlation here. And if you wanted to take a look at the package script, you could just pop that out too and be more information like that. But I'm now going to toggle out of just our process view. I'm going to clear the system trace, and I'm going to go through another example here, which is something that's pretty exciting. So this is an example of Gatekeeper bypass. And this is something that we report to Apple. It's now fixed in macOS 13.3. So essentially what we were doing at Red Canary when we were taking a look at Gatekeeper is trying to figure out a most atomic example of Gatekeeper bypass. That's something that we really like to do here, distill something down to the most component form. And so in this case, what I was trying to look at is something like, how could we determine, or how could we force macOS to not apply an extended attribute? Because that's essentially what tips off Gatekeeper. And if you guys would like to learn more about Gatekeeper, we wrote extensively about it in our blogs. But essentially what I was doing is I was going through some open source code here and noticed like, hey, files that are prefixed with _, resource support files, are not eligible for extended attributes. So if we start a system trace here, and if we load a very basic POC, and if we stop the system trace, and then we can just search through for something like own because I know the file name, you'll quickly see that, hey, it's highlighted, it's purple, which is a very unlikely color for our events. This is something that is indicative of something that you should probably look at. So if you right click and dig into the metadata here, you'll notice some interesting bits of information. So we're tipping off of this with a file rename event. This is because an archive is being inflated. And then down below, you can see like, hey, this file actually was not quarantined. You should probably take a look at it. And down below, you can also see that the top level directory was quarantined, right? So the basic heuristic here was essentially saying, is there a archive being inflated? Is the top level quarantined, but any sub archives that are inflated subsequently not quarantined? And we wrote extensively about this heuristic too in our threat detection report for easy viewing if you want to add this to your own sensor as well. Yes, and so that is a quick demo. And now we can talk a little bit more about some requirements. So the requirements for Mac Monitor are pretty straightforward. We require macOS 13.1. This is because there were some bugs in endpoint security as well as Swift UI that just caused things not to work super well. You'll need full disk access for the security extension. This is a requirement of endpoint security. We recommend an Apple Silicon processor, but of course it works for Intel as well. And also you can download this tool by going to our GitHub page, and there should be a widget in the top right or something that enables you guys to download this. And so for install, it's also a relatively straightforward process. So we made this into a distribution package, which was also a fun learning project in and of its own. But what you do is you just install the package normally. You'll get a prompt to approve the system extension. The user will just go ahead and do this. System preferences, or sorry, system settings will now present itself when full disk access is required. The user then just flips the switch to enable full disk access, and Mac Monitor will enable event tracing at that point. And uninstall is also something that we thought a lot about. Since this is security extension based, we do give you a few different options to remove the system extension. Of course, you could just remove the app, and users can do this in the Finder. So you just select the app and then delete it. You'll be asked to authenticate since it's hosting a system extension, or you could just remove the system extension on your own. So you just click system extension in the toolbar and uninstall that, or of course you can do it from our settings panel as well. And so now lastly, I couldn't be more happy to see all the community engagement and feedback so far. So please give this a go if you're at all interested in submit feedback, because the more feedback we get, the more we understand what the community is interested in, and the more we can help improve things. So thank you guys so much. And I'll leave that for Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that we have actual time for questions. You know, we have the tendency to go a little over, but let's see. So I did have a few great questions come up. Let's see, first of all, any top of mind feedback that you have, Brandon, for Apple's endpoint security team?
Yeah, well, first off, beautiful job. The team really put a ton of work into this, into making something that's a common sheet of music that any EDR vendor can tap into. And it's just now a matter of figuring out how to arrange these events in such a way where you can enable really high quality detection. But some really high level feedback that I wanted to give is primarily around the open scripting architecture. So more events relating to, hey, is an app scriptable? We know this we pulled from plist, but it'd be nice to pull it into endpoint security as well. Is a process executing OSA code? So instead of having to look at those memory mapping events, is there any other way that we can pull that directly out? Furthermore, detailed security control states. So stuff like Gatekeeper security policies being changed, things like Gatekeeper approving an app, things like system integrity protection being disabled, things like TCC access being granted to certain processes. This is all like super important from a security perspective, and is something that EDR sensor developers have to do kind of funky things to enable that kind of resolution. I would appreciate if Apple kind of produced this to us in a more nice way. Also, more forensic relevant information, particularly around Jaron Bradley's submitted biped. He did a fantastic job talking about this stuff. So this is actually the way that process trees should be generated on macOS. You click on an item in the doc, you should be able to easily identify that, hey, this process spawned from the doc. However, due to launch services, this is not something that can be easily done right now. Also, lastly, just one brief high-level objective for XProtect. We would appreciate if the Yara match was actually included in that ES message, just because I would rather not build a Yara parser and it's not built into Swift. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all the hard work going into endpoint security, particularly around inversion and path muting. Actually, that's another thing I wanted to mention. So this is actually kind of interesting. We know that path muting inversion is based on a per client basis. However, to simplify implementation, I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure other people would too, if inversion could be supported on a per event basis as well. So for memory mapping events, I would appreciate it if we could just invert things and just focus directly on those AppleScript, JavaScript components on an ad hoc testing basis for something like Mac Monitor.
Sweet. Let's see. What were some of the largest R&D hurdles you had to developing this?
Yeah, so it was kind of like a crazy process. So we didn't start with doing something like this. Of course, we started with a much smaller example. But some of the highest level things that were really difficult were figuring out how to properly work with the endpoint security API. Beyond that, how to properly work with a system extension API, communicate over XBC, ensure that all these security controls come together in such a way that it makes a nice user experience, this was really challenging and something that, I lost a lot of sleep over, blood, sweat, and tears kind of went into this whole process, but I'm happy that we came out on the other side. Also learning SwiftUI, that was a little bit of a difficult endeavor too, but I'm appreciative of all the community feedback out there around, learning SwiftUI.
Yeah, awesome. Let's see. What were some other good questions? We did have a question come in about open sourcing. So they say it's understandable that at this moment, it's not being released open source. But by any chance, what is your, like you personally, Brandon, your willingness to speak about maybe some implementation details or some of the like correlation logic or like heuristics that you have in place, perhaps like in blog form or like documented on GitHub? What are your thoughts there?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely love this. Any and all engagement around macOS security and, endpoint security is incredibly exciting to me. So if anyone has any further questions about how we went about exposing certain pieces of telemetry, how we went about implementing certain detection heuristics, please ask those questions and we'll be able to provide you some sort of answer. But also more than that, it's also likely that I'll learn something in the process because I had to kind of, essentially learn from a book to figure out how to do this kind of thing. So the more developers that I'm able to talk to that have also implemented endpoint security in such a way, I would really appreciate that connection.
Let's see. So there have been various questions related to integrating this with a SIM or like posting exports to S3 buckets or like a REST API. What options are available now for anyone who might think about wanting to ingest some of this data and work with this in other tools?
Yes, so we support two primary export options, JSON line and JSON pretty. I would expect, or I would suggest exporting this stuff into JSON line format if you're going to be ingesting it with a machine, essentially like a SIM or something like that. You will have to manually do this, like insert that JSON file yourself. However, if people are interested in like extensible tooling, taking Mac monitor telemetry and kind of transforming it into such a state that's easily ingestible, of course, add those feature suggestions and we'll be happy to comply and stuff. One top of mind example that I can think of is inserting this data into a MongoDB database. That's particularly relevant because if you're looking at something like Mongo Compass, you can click on the schema tab and easily see like an overview of all the different kind of like events that we have nicely laid out for you guys.
What are your thoughts on the idea of scaling this out in like a larger macOS environment? Like, does it make sense to do that? Is it purpose built for that? And also, along those lines, there have been several questions about like, or people wondering about how they might be able to use this for forensic investigations. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I really don't see this being deployed at scale right now. This is a testing research tool, I would say. Specifically something like Matt and I to use like procmon style. However, there really isn't really a case to deploy this at scale right now. And sorry, Matt, what was the second part of that question?
Questions related to like possible use cases for forensics.
Yeah, so I mean, one high-level thing that we've used it for is profiling security controls, right? So seeing how a security control on macOS behaves. You do something in response, seeing what comes out the other side. Similar things can be thought of from a malware analysis perspective as well, right? You launch this piece of malware, investigate the end behaviors. Something very similar like that could follow across all different forensic investigations. Of course, not down to the binary stage, though. There's no information pulled out about the Mako in particular. This is, again, very much an EDR-centric behavioral analysis tool.
Yeah, and those who are comfortable using the sysinternals tools, contrast this being related to Procmon in the way that Procmon is contrasted to Sysmon, right? Like Sysmon is the headless telemetry collection tool, whereas Procmon is the generalized like research and system troubleshooting tool that's intended for starting and stopping short traces that you can then analyze, where the telemetry that Procmon and Mac Monitor captures tends to be more verbose. Yes, you can filter a lot of that out, whereas something like the headless Sysmon is really designed specifically for like lower volume security-specific telemetry. So just wanted to offer that out to just kind of compare and contrast some of the use cases here.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Matt.
Okay. Brandon or Corey, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was it. Other than that, please, everyone, engage with us. We're super excited to be releasing this for free to the community. You know, we've used this internally for a whole bunch of different things. I'm excited to see what everyone else wants to use it for.
Super excited about all the feedback we've gotten. Keep it up, as Brandon said. And Brandon, Corey, really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh man, what a great presentation. That was so great, Josh. I really enjoyed that. Thank you to Matt, Brandon, and Corey for that presentation.
Agreed. That was very interesting. I definitely feel like I got my spidey senses activated.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a bit of a question back in turn for all of you. You got to ask some great questions of our speakers. And I do want to make a quick note on that. I know that we did not get to all of the questions today. We did have to wrap things up, but we are going to make sure that Matt, Brandon, Corey, and the entire Red Canary team do get all of the questions that you asked. So you will get some answers back. So please do keep those questions coming in, and we'll make sure those get to our speakers. And now your turn to answer a question. And what we are wondering is, what additional information would you like to get about the Red Canary solution? So there's a couple of options for you up on the screen here, a couple of ways that you can get started. Definitely take a second right now. Think of this as like clicking the easy button, right? There's so much information out there. There's so many different ways to get info on a solution. And this way you just click once and Red Canary is going to hand it all right to you. Send it right to your email inbox. So click on that poll. And while you're doing that, I think we are going to chat a little bit about handouts, Josh.
Yeah, let's go ahead and give you guys a reminder of what's in the handout section. There's the 2023 Threat Detection Report, then the blog introducing Red Canary Mac Monitor. There's also a link to download and install Mac Monitor, so definitely go check that out. And there's another blog post on how to validate your defenses with Atomic Harness, Text Harness for Linux and macOS. Again, these are all the great ways to follow up after the presentation we just heard.
Yeah, totally agree. It's, there's so much information, and we talk about this all the time, that you think you're going to remember everything. And then in 10 minutes or tomorrow, you're going to be thinking to yourself, oh no, what was that little tidbit of information or factoid? And it's really hard to recall. So if you download these handouts now, and actually we saw someone chime in and ask a question about where to get the free version of this. So where to get the solution, and it's linked right there in the handouts tab for you. So if you're looking to get started, or you're just looking to make sure that you've got those memory jogs, download those handouts, open those tabs, and have those ready. I promise your future self is going to thank you for that. So take a second now and do that. We're going to leave that poll up a second longer because, Josh, I feel like it's weird. I feel like there's something we're forgetting. I feel like there's one more thing that we need to do before we go. What do you think?
I think you are absolutely right. You're these are spot on. We have time for a prize giveaway. Just a reminder. Yeah, just a reminder, you have to be present at the live webinar today to win. All right. So today's winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Mike Hinserling, sorry if I'm butchering your last name, from Tennessee. And shout out to Tennessee. It's full of Tennessee in here. But congratulations to Mike. As always, we will be in touch about claiming your prize after the webinar.
Perfect. All right. Well, with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Red Canary and all of our speakers here today for making this webinar possible. I know that, and again, to our speakers, you've given us so much to think about, such an interesting solution, and I'm really excited for our audience to be able to get to dig into that a bit more on their own now. And of course, Josh, I have to say a giant thank you to you for being my awesome co-moderator here today. It's been an absolute blast hanging out with you.
Same here, Jess. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to all of you with us here today for making this possible as well. This webinar is a great example of the interesting in-depth learning that can happen when we all pull our information and engage in discussion together. It's been so great hanging out with you here today, Jess, talking about these cool ideas, super nerdy Spider-Man stuff, and more.
Yes.
I know I have learned a ton from this session today, and I hope you guys have as well.
Yes, definitely. The super nerdy Spider-Man stuff was one of my highlights, as well as all the great stuff we learned. Josh, I hope that we get to hang out and chat again soon. And to everyone out there in the audience, it's always such a pleasure to see you folks. And so I do hope that we will get to hang out on another webinar again in the near future. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful rest of your day.